following show is for entertainment purposes only and does not necessarily reflect the opinions of Empire Media LLC, its subsidiaries, affiliates, sponsors, and advertisers.
Can they hear me? Can they hear me live out there? Next beat. That ain't the beat I want.
Those was wood
another
beats
beat.
right
Another
there.
beat. Nope. Give me another beat. Give me another beat. Nope. That's not it. That's the beat. Turn it up.
Oh,
Turn it up. I gotta hear it a little louder. Can you make it louder than my headphones? Turn me up in my headphones. I'm still stuck in the 80s/90s. Lottos, kangaroo boots, nanny ghosts, feelers, jumpsuits and troops, Junos, color Levi's, Bugs Bunny sweaters with the rhinestone ring on it, fighting and making up the next day. Nobody getting shot, working or hustling to get it, or get got. We had love for the streets, our family, our foes, our friends, respect for the elderly. Pager/payphone, sneaking into Adams Theater, watching Crush grooving tougher than leather. Hopping gates out the college port to bang out, cause you don't wanna get caught at mom's crib or at Vaughn's crib, eating funny dinner with the fam. Church every Sunday, 8 o'clock a.m. And even if I fell asleep in the back row or played sick, no matter what, man, I still had to go 80s, baby. He's a DJ, I'm a rapper. He's a DJ, I'm a rapper. 80s, baby. He's a DJ, I'm a rapper.
Welcome, everybody. How you doing? This is the Xcast right here on the EmpireMedia.com. We're coming at you tonight with episode number 47I. The Warriors are the NBA champions. The Penguins are the NHL champions. And it's day 4,742 in the search for Tim Shovelday. But that's not what we're here to talk about tonight. We are not here to talk about our regular stuff. We are here to discuss one of our deep issues. Tonight's deep issue is the theory of Atlantis. With us, as always, is our producer Adam and our deep issue specialist Ed Zaharsky. How you guys doing?
Awesome. How are you?
Doing good.
Awesome.
Doing good. How are you?
I am awesome. Thank you. But Atlantis, it's a weird one. It's a weird one. Weird one for me, anyway. I love Atlantis. I like the theories. I like the story. I like mythology. But I must admit, I've never started out a deep issue show like this before. But I must admit that this is one that I'm really not on board with. And I'm hoping that one or both of you guys convince me of something that I don't want. Because I like to believe in conspiracies.
So you're crushing the show before we even get started.
Yeah, but hey, I like to believe in this stuff. But I'm going to maybe be the skeptic tonight. But hopefully I'm not. Hopefully not everyone here is the skeptic. But should I set the groundwork, or do you guys want to jump in?
No, go ahead. Go ahead. Set the groundwork, and then we can go ahead and tell you what I think.
Okay, right on. Right on. Okay, basically the first time you hear about Atlantis, or well, one of the first recorded times you hear about Atlantis is one of my icons, one of my favorite people to study is Plato. Plato writes about Atlantis to the people of Egypt, the people of Greece, and the people of that time. In the Timaeus is the first time you hear about Atlantis. But I guess the main debate that comes about from that is simply, was Plato being allegorical? Was Plato telling a story? Was Plato telling a fiction story that, inadvertently is trying to give a warning of excessive pride, is what some people think. I admittedly am one of those people. But many believe that the theory of Atlantis is deeper than that, pardon the pun. That it does go beyond just Plato being allegorical. Plato telling a tale. Maybe he was telling a tale, but that doesn't necessarily mean that Atlantis didn't exist. Or that there wasn't some sort of recorded or unrecorded recollection or unwritten history, or an ancient lost history, if you will, of the city of Atlantis. Or people say the city of Atlantis a lot. Really, it's like the continent of Atlantis almost, right? Or the island of Atlantis.
Yeah, they I mean, there is some individuals that give a very specific, I forgot who exactly it is, but there's a very specific size that some say it's like a combination of like Libya and
Plato described it as larger than
yeah,
Libya and Asia Minor put together.
yes, and there's some that say that it stretched all the way from the southern portion of South America all the way up to up towards the North Atlantic. Whether or not that's true or not, again, that's for discussion as we go on tonight.
Yeah.
But
Plato describes it as that size, and he also says that at that point, even though it was in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, basically they're not in the middle, but that area in the Atlantic Ocean, that he says that at that point, the Atlantic was navigable. At least that area of the Atlantic was navigable. Mostly because, and that doesn't, there's some sense there, there's some science there, there's some geology there, that if there was this big landmass, then that area around it that may be unnavigable now because it's the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, it wouldn't necessarily be like that because now there's this big island there that would shift the waters and not make it quite as deep and not quite as wide. I'm no geologist, but that's, it makes sense to me anyway. But,
yeah.
Did I cut you off, Adam?
No, go ahead.
Okay. The story, according to Plato, he says, was told to his grandfather, Solon. And basically, he tells them that the island of Atlantis went to war with the Greeks, with the totem of Hercules, and that their excessive pride, despite the fact that Atlantis was rich in wealth, that they, that their hubris did them in, if you will. But the claim to this, and here's where you can have some potential scientific backing with later expeditions, even very modern ones like 2015, is that they describe Atlantis's wealth because of a special metal that was found there that they could use to not only trade with other people, but also to further their own technological needs. Pieces of this potential metal have been found in strange ocean areas, in areas that could potentially be, part of Atlantis. So, Ed, Adam, what do you guys think? Am I being a hater too early, too often?
I don't think so. I think when we're dealing with a theory like this, the funny thing is there's so many different accounts,
right,
to the lost continent of Atlantis. It's almost like I know we're actually going to touch on this too. It's kind of like the flood theory, though. I mean,
sure,
Christianity isn't the only religion in the world that has a flood theory within their early doctrine. There's other civilizations that have a flood theory within their own doctrine as well. Same thing goes with the lost continent of Atlantis. I think Plato kind of set the groundwork for it, but what I believe he was maybe touching on is not so much Atlantis itself, but the possibility of there being, another continent out there or another civilization out there that was, wiped off of the face of the earth. And whether that was Atlantis as Plato said it was, or if it was something entirely different, then I think something like that could be certainly more believable than the actual Plato account to Atlantis, who Plato in some way may have been more focused toward the philosophy or the theory of
the allegorical nature of
exactly than the actual the actual place itself.
What's strange, and I don't know if we want to get into this now. I hope we got a few minutes to touch on it later. If not, but this idea of the flood that's talked about in the Bible and it is mentioned within other cultures along with some other things out of the Bible, especially the Old Testament, there's actually far more scientific proof, some even validated scientific proof that backs those theories up than there is for Atlantis. And one of my problems with Atlantis is, to me, like this big search for Atlantis kind of goes along with this idea that, to me, Atlantis was meant to be a form of mythology. To me, it's not different than searching for Asgard or searching for the Elysian Fields. You know, and hey, those actually, although I say that because for the most part, people listening and the people at this table are going to view Asgard and Tartarus and the Elysian Fields as things out of mythology, stories, allegories, something to tell your kids, something to study and enjoy. But truth is, at least those were once, those things were worshipped by people. They truly were. Many people truly did believe in Tartarus, and maybe you still do. Maybe, you know, and did believe in, well, you know, Asgard, the Norse gods. You know, I don't know how many people out there really are kind of still worshiping Odin or Thor. There are some. They are out there. They're out there.
Some people in Sweden, Norway.
Yeah, Google it on or search it on Facebook, and you'll find dozens of groups that are Odin worshippers. You know, I mean, it is out there, and I don't even mean to discredit it at all, actually. But I lump Atlantis in with that. But that doesn't mean I'm right. It really doesn't, because there's been expeditions. There's been people who believe this. Ignatius Donnelly, is that a guy you guys are familiar with at all?
Not really, no.
Okay, Ignatius Donnelly was American author of Atlantis, the Antediluvian, thank you, Ed. Antediluvian World, Atlantean megalithic civilization. I can't talk well today. But, best-selling book.
That's where a lot of the current
Right.
Mythology comes from.
Comes from the 20th century. But what a lot of people don't realize or don't understand, and again, this doesn't mean that Atlantis didn't exist. What a lot of people don't realize is that this idea that Atlantis was a real place and that we should be searching for it didn't really come about until the 20th century. Plato writes Timaeus in 360 BC. Nobody's looking for Atlantis from 360 to 359 BC till like 1890. It's not really a thing. You know, I mean, for the most part, again, that doesn't mean that it's not legit. I'm not trying to be the total hater, but that is kind of the truth.
Well, I guess like usual, I'm kind of on the other end of the
That's
spectrum.
all right. I want to hear the other side.
That I think that Atlantis actually probably was a thing. Not that I could provide any proof for that, but I think the context where it actually makes sense, you're never going to find it because it only makes sense in the context of a flood, of being an antediluvian continent. And actually, it wasn't, Plato wasn't the first one to mention it.
No, okay.
It was Herodotus.
Oh, okay.
Actually. And one thing they have in common is that they both visited Egypt, and another conspiracy, if you believe in it, that there may have been a hall of records, essentially, that now possibly very deep, that essentially had information about everything about the human race and the pre-flood world, which they may have actually had access to.
And when you talk about that too, Ed, with the ancient lost history, that's a lot of the biblical things too. Are these guys who are writing the Bible? I know, the Bible wasn't written directly by God; it was written by men. We all know that. But these things they're talking about, whether they were right or wrong, they are reporting them as if they were commonly known facts of the day. Historical things that happened. Perhaps they're wrong.
So wait, this isn't fake news or anything like that?
Maybe it was wrong, but they weren't lying. They weren't telling untruths. They were reporting what people knew. Not what people wanted to learn, what people knew back then. at least the learned, knew. And that could be said about a Hall of Records, if you will, of Egypt. Because, yeah, it was, Plato is telling the tale that was supposedly told to his grandfather Solon by an Egyptian chieftain or something.
Mm-hmm.
But, yeah, no, please continue.
So, yeah, it would have to be essentially, I suppose it could have happened post-flood, and there could have been like an earthquake, and it slid in, but it really makes sense in the context of there being a flood. So if that happened, it probably isn't going to be found. Or, maybe it could be buried deep under the ocean, but it wouldn't just be like on the ocean floor. At this point, it would probably be completely buried, so it'd be kind of a waste to go searching for it. But in regards to what you're talking about, like people worshiping, Thor or Odin, I tend to think that when like you were saying, that a lot of societies essentially have a flood myth, that when you have something like that, it actually tends to be based in something true. It's not as if every person on this planet just has something programmed into them that is going to imagine there being a gigantic flood, that it's actually more likely that several people experience that, and as it got passed down, if the three of us in this room experience something, what are the odds that we're all going to tell that story the exact same way?
Oh,
and then things can vary over time.
Yeah, I agree with you, Ed. I think that the more people that have an account of a certain story, and obviously the flood story is a pretty specific account of a flood happening. And I think you're right. I think that based off of, just different civilization, different interpretation of it, different local religion and different local belief is going to have a certain a certain outlook or a certain belief on why that happened. So yeah, I think the more people, the more you hear about a flood, the more it's probably true in a sense. So yeah, I can get on board with that, definitely.
No, and I actually agree with everything both of you two just said as well. And that's, the fact is, history is lost over time, from time to time. And more so than history being lost, because even if you can ensure that the history isn't lost, the details of the history will be lost, and they will be debated upon. I mean, how many intelligent Americans, intelligent, educated Americans can tell you anything about President John Quincy Adams?
Not many.
Very few. Very few. Yeah, I mean, some could.
Not millennials.
Aside from him being president. None of those people would deny that he's president, that he was a president.
A few people who were into history and maybe they read something about him and oh yeah.
John Adams' son, right? Yeah, and that's like, there's going to be maybe a half a dozen things that people are going to know. And the one main one that they're going to know is he was president. And they're not going to debate that.
Even people who are really into history,
they
know much because that may just not have been something that interested them. I mean,
as someone and I met a lot of smart people, a lot of great people, but as someone that went to grad school for history, I can assure you there are people with master's degrees in history walking around that couldn't tell you more than half a dozen things about John Quincy Adams. And I just pulled that one. I mean, you could say that for like 35 of the 45 presidents. Mm-hmm. I mean, you really could. It's not even a criticism. I'm not saying that to be rude to anybody.
Yep.
But it's the truth. So that happened in our own country 200 years ago. This happened in a faraway country, potentially in a place that no longer exists, 2,500 years ago. Details are going to get lost. Things are going to be debated.
Especially if it's underwater, too.
Right.
I mean, Ed, I think you were alluding to this earlier, that, if it's underwater for that amount of period, for that amount of time, you're not going to find much from it.
No, and honestly, anybody who would be able to fund some sort of expedition would probably have a vested interest in not wanting it found anyway.
True.
Which actually is something I wanted to bring up is all these things about Atlantis. Really, there's no way to know for certain with whether one's true or not. One thing that I think is probably very likely is that they probably actually were an advanced civilization. The reason I say that is because I find it very likely that pre-flood we actually were probably just as advanced, or maybe even more advanced than we are today.
Okay, so you believe, when you say that, and I'm not discounting it, you believe that if these places existed pre-flood, that they had like computers,
or something
cars,
equivalent.
or I mean, exactly. They may not have gone that route in technology.
That's interesting.
Yes.
But the idea that they would have, they would have at the very least, typewriters or engines or combustion or something along these lines.
Yep. There was a book written called Forbidden Archaeology by Michael Cremo and Richard Thompson. It's a pretty thick book. It's like 1,000 pages. But the central premise of the book...
I'm out on that one then.
Yeah, it's not something you sit down and read page by page. I think you might...
Are there pictures or anything in it?
Yeah, there's pictures too.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but it's not a picture book.
He's listening. Adam's back on board.
I should have brought it. But their central premise is essentially that we're devolving. They don't necessarily buy into a biblical worldview, like that there was a flood. But essentially, they found all of these archaeological sites and all these findings that do not fit with the standard mainstream view of history. And essentially the view is essentially, like I just said, that we are either just as smart or we were smarter in the past. And there's plenty of things as evidence for that, like finding essentially a nuclear reactor underground, or finding a basically big field of essentially like glass that in a desert, which the only thing we know that could make something like that is a nuclear bomb. A lot of other essentially like technological feats that are found that are kind of, they're so long ago that it was, well, we didn't have that technology.
And you've seen that. I mean, you've seen other accounts too of just how advanced some of these early civilizations were.
You can look up many different unexplainable relics that people have found. I mean, what the Egyptian battery is one people talk about a lot.
Yeah. There's, you've seen hieroglyphics and stuff before. They've found hieroglyphics on some of these old Egyptian temples that appear to show like a light bulb or something like that.
Do you think those pyramids were built by hand with cheap slave labor?
Perhaps.
Well, it's interesting too, because isn't there, isn't one of the theories too that Egyptians and Mayans and stuff came from Atlantis?
Yeah, absolutely.
And something I find very interesting is the the similarities between some of their signature temples, their signature pyramids. The triangular looking pyramids. Obviously, the Mayans is different. It's more it's more square, obviously the steps and everything like that. And, the Egyptian ones are more, more smooth, but
what's strange
seems
about
like
that though is the idea that the Mayans were Atlanteans, which a lot of people do believe that kind of goes against the flood theory. Because, correct me if I'm wrong, but in the flood theory, it's basically says that the Atlanteans were wiped out because of this great flood. But if you believe in a what's the word I want to use here, a modern geological ideal, then you could believe that Atlantis would have sunk away into the seas slowly, and that some of the people in the advanced civilization would have been able to leave, would have been able to see that our land is shrinking, our place is going away, we need to move on.
I think you could almost, I don't know if you could totally discredit any account based on that. I mean, because it seems like it's certainly plausible that your worldview at the time, and that is if it's not as advanced as you maybe suspect it is, Ed, where they had computers and everything like that. But I mean, somebody's worldview then was probably much smaller than ours is today. When we have smartphones in our pockets that can reach the other end of the world and
Google image anything or
exactly.
Call your brother-in-law that moved to Uganda.
Exactly. I mean, you'd be in touch. You could be in touch with somebody on the other side of the world, and in a split second. But a flood to them that engulfs their entire worldview, which could be thousands of miles at the very, very most. I mean, that could play a big impact on them thinking that, oh well, if a flood is here, then the flood must be everywhere.
Sure.
And them getting on a boat or a raft or whatever and going to another place in the world, again, seems like it's a plausible theory.
Sure. No, that's true. That's true. And just because there was a great disaster doesn't mean that somebody could have survived. People do survive disasters. And if all it requires is 5% of the people surviving for them to be able, or less, for them to go on to become the Mayans or to travel across the Atlantic and teach the Mayans something. There's also a theory out there that the Atlanteans were Mayans, that the Mayans came first, and that the Mayans went off and started the island of Atlantis. Not built the island, but just that they populated it.
To me, it seems like it's probably, if anything, it makes more sense for it to be the other way around.
I agree.
Rather than the Mayans going and starting, this lost continent of Atlantis, then them leaving or fleeing Atlantis and heading over to North America, South America, and starting a new civilization there. That seems to me like it's more plausible.
Yeah. And many of the things you're bringing up, Adam, come from the book Atlantis, The Truth Behind the Legend, which is by a couple of Greek authors, A.G. Galanopoulos, probably saying that wrong, and Edward Bacon, definitely saying that right. But
you know that word.
Yeah, Bacon, that word I know, and Edward, that's a pretty easy one. But and as much as I was kind of a bit of a naysayer when it comes to the Ignatius Donnelly book, even though I don't really have a desire to criticize this best-selling book that a lot of people obviously went off of, but most agree that this Greek version is a much more realistic interpretation. Now, it was written in the 1960s, and they actually talk about a volcanic disaster that sacked Atlantis, other than a flood disaster.
And we've certainly heard of, throughout history, of volcanic activity wiping out cities and ancient cities, and
right.
So
just like today, and this is a lot of the direct interpretation biblical scholars like to use this example, and it's a good example. It's a very good example. Is Mount St. Helens.
Mm-hmm.
When you go to Mount St. Helens now, and you see this, if you didn't know about the volcanic disaster that occurred there, in the lifetime of many people who are listening to this right now, if not in your lifetime, in your parents' lifetime, that you wouldn't guess that happened over a week's time. You would guess that happened over 1 million years, 100,000 years. And one of the issues that I view this as kind of a problem, even if they're right, I view it as a problem, but modern geologists love to write off pretty much any one of these theories, any issues they have. They love to write it off by using time as the excuse.
Yeah.
Time is the example. That, well...
It's like a fairy tale.
Yeah, that happened over 1 million years. And there's many that believe that, well, maybe the Earth hasn't even been here that long.
One of them.
And, no, I mean, and it's, a lot of people hear that. They hear Ed say that, and they think, Ed's crazy. He's crazy. But, do a little research. There's actually a lot more to back that up.
There's tons of evidence.
There's a lot.
quite frankly, there's just as much to back it up as there is to back up the more widely accepted claims. There really is.
Well, it's because the Bible is made out to be this antiquated book that is not a history book. Yet there's actually quite a bit of it in that it's not a science book, but it doesn't necessarily contradict science.
Sure.
I mean, there's plenty of evidence for a young Earth creation, which, in case you aren't aware, for people listening out there, the kind of, the typical mainstream view is that the universe is billions of years old, or the Earth is millions of years old. A lot of creationists, will think that God created the Earth, but it's compatible with evolution, and we're millions of years old. Young Earth creationists tend to think the Earth was, give or take, about 6,000 years old, and then about 2,000 years roughly after creation, there was a worldwide flood that essentially destroyed all of civilization, and since we have rebuilt, and that essentially that a lot of the archaeological finds essentially are kind of in line with that.
And one of the things that is used a lot to back that up, aside from the Mount St. Helens one that I mentioned already, is the Grand Canyon.
Yep, it's where the water runoff from the flood.
Yeah, and that's, again, and that's something that by modern geologists it's written off as this occurred over millions of years. Yet, when they look deeper into the Grand Canyon, there are more than legitimate fossils of aquatic creatures within the Grand Canyon. Where'd they come from? I mean, you basically have dolphin fossils in the Grand Canyon.
Yep.
I mean, and other, aside from other things, from this crust. Now this goes to, and this is the one that really freaks people out, even Christians, even devout Christians, because for the most part, Christians view it as, this used to be a litmus test, actually, for Christians, that they would actually use this on the stand in court from time to time, is they would ask them just to make sure that, okay, it's cool that you're a Christian, but we want to make sure that
you're a real Christian.
No, that you're not a crazy Christian.
Oh, okay.
That you still believe in law and order and science above all else, and that your faith is your faith, and that's on the side. And one of the things that they ask them is they say, do you believe God created the earth? They would say yes, of course, and any Christian's still safe answering that one with yes. Okay, you believe in creation. So then they say, did he do it in 7 days? And that's like this. That's where you're stuck. That's where you have to say, well, no, perhaps it's allegorical. Perhaps a day to God's a million years. Perhaps, but if you go to some of these ideas with the catastrophic nature of it, a flood theory, the Grand Canyon, volcanic theories, put all this into the mix, maybe it did happen in 7 days. Maybe the Earth did come about that quickly. If something catastrophic enough did it, then all of a sudden, this stuff is happening. It's happening overnight. Now there's trees where there didn't used to be trees. Now there's rock where there didn't used to be rock. Now there's ocean where there didn't used to be ocean. It could happen.
Well, the thing that when you're talking about God, I don't, the nature of God is I don't think humans can fully comprehend that, even though, it's God is made in our image. But I don't know if God is who we think it is, and I'm talking us in this room, and I'm, I was brought up Catholic. Josh, you're Catholic, and kind of Catholic. But I mean, we have that Catholic vision of God, that Christian vision of God, who seems like he can do anything.
Sure.
And if he wanted to create something in 7 days, then can he create something in 7 days? Is it,
Well, and what's strange about that, the reason I bring that up, because this isn't a show about God. We've done shows about God. We've done shows about Jesus. But like Adam brought up earlier, and like Ed touched on as well, that these ideas aren't exclusive to Christianity. So you don't have to be a Christian to believe this. These were people that believed in Poseidon, when I'm talking about Plato.
And in Norse mythology, they discuss similar things. And in the Mayan religions, they discuss these things. You're talking about places all over the world here, and like Adam said, they didn't have cell phones and Facebook, and they weren't tweeting each other with these ideas back then. These were coming about because people knew about them. Perhaps they knew about them falsely. We don't know that. That's why we're here to discuss. That's why we're calling it a theory. But these happened, and they actually predate Jesus.
Yeah.
They predate the knowing and the talking about. I won't say they predate the God of Abraham, because if you're a believer in the God of Abraham, he predated all. But that's not the point. He predated people talking about it, predated the life of Abraham, Moses, any of these things.
To me, it seems actually kind of unscientific not to at least consider some things, because it's almost like you have this presupposition of, okay, this is my worldview. We're millions of years old. We evolved. The Earth has just been slowly changing over these years. We've had a few ice ages in there, whatever. The continent shifting has been very slow. It just doesn't make sense that this is in here at all. Instead of actually taking a look at it and saying, oh, hey, why is this coming from so many civilizations? You're basically discarding it.
Yeah.
Even like when we were talking about the gods earlier, I actually don't think it's implausible that or necessarily unscientific that there weren't other gods. I mean, the Bible basically states that there are other gods, that you should only have no other gods before the real God, but it's...
Especially in the Old Testament.
Yeah, and it you know what? Thor probably existed. Odin probably existed, especially if there were essentially fallen angels and ancient technology, that these things were more advanced and more powerful than your average human. Who's not to say that, okay, so we've built up this mythology around these things, over time. So maybe what we're thinking they are isn't what they are, but they probably existed in some form.
I've always had a crazy theory, and I mentioned this, I believe, briefly on the simulation theory episode, that, are we certain that there wasn't some war between the gods? And the God of Abraham just won?
Well, the Bible basically says that.
The first commandment, it's not typically translated in this way anymore, especially for Christians. Not that it's not translated this way, it's just shortened. A lot of in the Hebrew, they a lot of times will still read this whole thing, and I'm not going to quote it exactly. I don't know it word for word, and I don't speak Aramaic or Hebrew. But the first commandment says, there is no other God before me, or I'm the Lord thy God, and I am a jealous God, so you shall place no gods before me. He's not saying that there isn't other beings with power. He's saying those things with gods, those other gods, lowercase g, aren't God. Like, I'm God. I'm God, uppercase G. That's my name. I'm not Thor the god. I'm not Poseidon the god. I'm God. And
obviously people worship them. And we were made in God's image, but we were made in the image of the gods as well. It's very likely that these are just essentially some advanced race that, like I said before, it's almost maybe seemed as if they had superpowers due to their advanced technology.
Yeah. If you recall, Adam, I believe on the simulation theory episode, we touched on the idea that, if things could be changed, perhaps those things could exist back then. Perhaps Thor did exist, but that was changed later. That's going not too deep, but perhaps too deep in the wrong direction for this episode. But there's possibilities for that out there. There definitely is.
And it's, again, too, and I think you just mentioned it, Ed, that, there's been more than one civilization that's been a polytheistic religion, or polytheistic civilization. And then that goes back to this to that other, what we talked about earlier too.
There's also been other ones that were monotheistic.
Yeah,
a lot of times people lump the Jews, Christians, and Muslims in as the only monotheistic, but they're really not. For instance, somebody was actually just telling me this the other day, and I admit I didn't realize this, but many of the Native American tribes, that was actually more of a monotheistic religion. We kind of view it as, oh no, but they worship the sun god, and they worship this, and they worship that. No, really, they worshipped kind of, the way it was described to me anyway, by someone who very, very much knew what he was talking about, said, no, it was more, he said it's more comparable to, like, Catholicism or, like, to the Force in Star Wars. Like, they kind of worship an all-powerful energy field,
Josh just got a huge boner, and he's going to be...
he's converting.
He's going to come back next week
I prefer not to talk about my boners when we're discussing religion.
Worshiping some god.
It works, though.
The Chippewa tribe, worship. That's what Josh is going to come back as next week.
But
it's like the Force.
Well,
really?
It's got like aspects to it like that. That they worship the energy field, not so much the small time deities that are mentioned are more comparable to saints in Catholicism, or angels, or something along those lines.
And that's funny you mentioned that too, Josh, because it seems like Catholicism it's a monotheistic religion. Obviously, it's Christianity, but Catholicism in and of itself is almost a polytheistic religion. I mean, just the amount of
God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit, right there.
That, and then all of the different saints and everything that who you can pray to, and I know that
archangels and angels, and seraphims and cherubims.
Exactly, it's interesting. It's different.
Again, like Ed said, acknowledging that there are other powers other than the one true God, just acknowledging that despite those powers, there is only one true God. It's basically the idea behind Christianity.
Not that I'm trying to compare this position to God, but there are other leaders of other nations in the world.
Sure.
They're not our leader.
Right. That's true. That's true. And just because you have a leader of your nation doesn't mean that they're the only person with power.
Yep.
Even in a dictatorship, there is somebody below them, and in a country such as ours, there's a Senate, there's a Congress, there's there's governors, there's a Supreme Court,
mayors.
Correct. Absolutely. We're digressing, but I feel like we're making good points here. So I mean, Atlantis, am I wrong to just write it off to some degree because I view it as mythology?
Well, how much are you writing it off? Are you writing it off to the point where you said that there can't be any lost civilization in this world?
I'm writing it off, even though I have gone out of my way in this particular episode to say that I'm not necessarily a believer or a non-believer in some of the modern science. I see no scientific proof that Atlantis existed. I know that they've tried expeditions in 2015. They did the one, they spent a fortune, went underwater. They really thought they had found something. And they did. They found many things that looked like they were man-made structures.
Was one of them, too, they found a bunch of copper,
yes.
or a certain type of copper that Plato actually said was a huge source of income for...
That was where their wealth came from.
Yes.
Because they're known as very wealthy people, the Atlanteans.
Yes.
And they found some of this, they found it, but for the most part, this has been debunked. It doesn't really add up. And for every scientist that says, no, but this could be a stairway, there's 3 that say, no, not really. I can show you a bunch of stuff underwater that looks like that. Things do form underwater. Water is very powerful. Water is more powerful than fire. It really is. It's more damaging. Nothing is more damaging. Anyone that's ever had a flooded basement can tell you that,
And especially if it's now at the bottom of the ocean under a pile of dirt, which is then under all that water.
Right.
Well, like, again, I mean, you look at like the Titanic. I mean, the Titanic sunk over 100 years ago.
Right.
Not much over 100 years ago, but it was over 100 years ago. And
In our lifetime, there were still people alive who were on the Titanic.
yes, I think
Now
they're all,
they're all dead.
yeah, I think they're all dead. But yeah, but I mean, they're saying the Titanic itself could be totally gone, in not too distant of a future. And there's
Sure.
already aspects of the Titanic right now that are gone. That's been basically
It
reclaimed.
didn't take a
by-
million years.
No, it did. It certainly didn't. But just going off of that idea that if something is at the bottom of the ocean for that amount of period of time, then you're probably not going to find much of anything
No, you're right.
that's left.
And to go with like Ed's point, if there will be no sign of the Titanic 300 years after it sunk, then it's not crazy to think that there would be no sign of a space shuttle 3,000 years after it sunk, or after it was covered and destroyed by a flood and covered up.
That's not to say you wouldn't have certain things that might be intact, but it's not like you're going to find a perfectly formed civilization. And
Sure.
you're going to have to do a lot of inferring on what some of those things are.
One interesting thing though is the locations. Because where was that expedition at where they found the copper, and did they say where it was? Was it in the Mediterranean kind of?
I don't know.
Okay, well, one of the other theories too is that obviously Atlantis was in the Atlantic Ocean. It's halfway between North America and the European African continents. I don't necessarily think it could be a flood. It could be a theory called, I think it was called crust displacement, where obviously the shifting of the plates caused a continent to eventually get pushed underneath other areas of Earth, and over the course of time, then it either became displaced or it totally disappeared altogether. There were some theories as well that say that there was a civilization buried underneath the ice of Antarctica. And there was, kind of piggybacking off of that theory was that this civilization was, the startup of potentially the Mayans as well. And if there's any link to Atlantis, because a lot of people say that the Mayans were direct descendants or could have been the exact descendants of of the people of Atlantis, then perhaps this is further proof of that. And this is something that isn't just being pulled out of the sky or anything like that. Albert Einstein actually wanted, he was interested in this crust displacement theory, and he actually called on Eisenhower to help fund research into Antarctica and whether or not there is stuff buried underneath the ice. Unfortunately, Eisenhower left office before he can put funding behind it, so it never got off the ground. But
And the next guy who came into office was assassinated.
yes, and after he's getting ready to blow the lid on aliens, but
It's there, man.
and then Lyndon Johnson, the Vietnam War, and then it kept on going from there. But there's actually people say that they have found a 14-mile structure underneath the ice of Atlantis, or not Atlantis, of Antarctica. But they've never been able to get the money to go and actually excavate and see what this thing
Photos
is.
of the aerial photos.
Yeah, I believe before you could have seen it on like Google Earth, but nobody's been able to go there and actually lead an expedition to try to see exactly what this thing is. And this is, I believe, one of the things too that caught the attention of Albert Einstein as well, and whether or not there is actually a lost civilization that is buried underneath Antarctica. that was lost in part because of crust displacement.
Not to mention all the things that Admiral Robert Byrd talked about in his expedition to Antarctica, where he tried to go in depth and things he saw when he went further.
So, kind of relating to what we touched on earlier, it's thought that after the biblical flood, not too long after, there was actually an ice age, but there would have been enough time in between that essentially civilization popped back up and started spreading, that very well the continent of Antarctica could have been basically inhabited by people, and then it was frozen over.
It was frozen over, and eventually over time, it settled on the bottom of the earth, and based on obviously the position of the earth to the sun, Antarctica isn't going to be getting a lot of sunlight down there, so there's
one of the out of place artifacts. Actually, there's a map of showing Antarctica before it was frozen over.
Mhm.
Essentially, it shows like South America and with Brazil on it, and then Antarctica as if it was just another.
I have seen that, with some grass on it and things. What
Yep.
year was that? Does it say?
Let me see.
I have seen that map, yeah.
It's the Curie-Reis map. I think it was the 1513.
Okay. No, and there are some fascinating maps. There's a book. If I hope I'm saying the name right, but the Sea Kings of Old, I believe, is what the book is called. I could be wrong about that. If you want to Google it, I bet if you hit it in Sea Kings, it'll pop up. But it talks a lot about these just wealthy mariners, wealthy sailors going around and talking about some of these things that existed at the time. Just ancient. We're talking, very, very ancient times, not 1600s or 1800s. A very, very long time ago that these things surfaced. And another thing that's worth noting is, although there's nothing recorded of something sinking as large as Atlantis reportedly was, but the idea of an island being there and then disappearing, going away, is not unheard of by any stretch of the imagination. There are many documented cases of islands that once existed and now don't. It happens. Water levels change and things can happen.
Things don't stay the same forever.
Right, they do not.
No, and it's funny too, Josh, that there's islands within the Atlantic Ocean too that very well could have been part of Atlantis itself.
Sure.
There's islands off of Portugal. Actually, I don't know if they're part of Portugal or not, but I think they're called the Azores. Beautiful islands. You look at these pictures of this place, and it seems like, if Atlantis was a place, then I'm assuming this is probably what it looked like. It's beautiful. It looks like Jurassic Park. It looks like they could have filmed Jurassic Park in this place. Very, very lush. It's waterfalls, lagoons, trees, and it's really quite amazing what this place looks like. And again, there's another theory out there that these islands, the Azores Islands, and I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but were actually, part of Atlantis when it was obviously a much bigger continent than what we have it is today. So,
we talked about Atlantis being, an allegory for pride, for excessive pride. According to Plato, the Atlanteans, or the people of Atlantis, conquered a big part of what we now consider Europe and Africa as well. If these were areas taken over by them before they decided to take on the Greeks, take on the Totem of Hercules, take on these other
forces and eventually went down. So there is supposedly some historical evidence from these areas that back up. I don't know if historical is really even the right word because it's not written history, but history that backs up their conquests, or the conquest of somebody anyway. That there's some sort of, of warring nation that wanted more land, fought for it, won. So there is something there that Atlantis was supposedly trying to spread out, trying to conquer, trying to win out more, and that eventually led to their downfall. Now that has very little to do with the flood or where they went, because just because a nation loses a war, even if they lose the worst kind of war, it doesn't mean your nation disappears. The Ottoman Empire lost World War I and was never an empire again, but it's not like that land's gone. It's still there.
How many nations in history have conquered, expanded, obtained great wealth, and eventually fallen?
Right.
Isn't Denmark kind of the other way around? Doesn't Denmark have the most acquired land that wasn't actually conquered by anybody, because of the way that the land mass there is actually kind of growing out into the ocean?
Yeah, I
think I've heard something like
Norway,
that before.
Denmark, and Finland are kind of famous for existing at the will of other nations and not being conquered. There's actually a term they use in history and somewhat in even in political science. It's a term used quite a bit called the Finlandization of a country. And Finlandization, in essence, is when your country exists at the behest of another country. They exist only because another country allows it. And in the case of Finland, and actually Finland isn't even the best example of Finlandization. It's just kind of the one that gets used, but Finland existed simply because Russia allows it to exist. Especially not so much today, but in the past, 200 years ago, 100 years ago, 75 years ago, because and only because they're allowed to exist. To me, a great example of this is the country of San Marino. Tiny, tiny little kingdom nation that exists completely within the borders of Italy. Now, Italy isn't really known since the end of World War II, since their loss in World War II. They're definitely not known for military conquest. And that definitely doesn't seem to be their future either with the way Italy is. It's more of a vacation spot. Mild weather, good wine, Ferraris. It's a socialist paradise, basically. And it can afford to be because everybody wants to go vacation there. Nobody wants to live there. Everybody wants to vacation there. But San Marino is a perfect example of it. It exists only because Italy allows it to exist and allows it to be an independent nation. Because even the countries that could stop Italy from doing something wouldn't do it. The United States wouldn't come stop Italy from taking control of a city-sized country that resides 100% within their borders. That would be like if, Birmingham, Alabama, all of a sudden decided it was a different country.
What about if Detroit wanted to take over Highland Park? Isn't Highland Park and totally surrounded by Detroit?
I think it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have to give an extremely local example, but yes, it is. The only difference there being that Highland Park's recognized as Michigan, which is Detroit's not a sovereign nation either, so it would be harder to pull that off. But yes.
I'm sure people would care if Italy decided to take over the Vatican.
Yeah, that one. Although completely within the borders of, Italy, as far as I know, is the only country in the world that has two sovereign nations within its borders.
Isn't the Vatican totally within the city limits of Rome, too?
Yes, it is. It is. It's 1 mile long, or 1 mile wide, basically. But Yeah, you got 1 billion Catholics to deal with if you decide to all of a sudden we're going to take over.
We're going to annex the
Yeah,
Vatican.
the Pope is more powerful than the Prime Minister of Italy, so they're good. But there are some other islands out there, and if I'm not trying to get off Atlantis here, because hopefully we'll jump back into it. But you guys are familiar with Sandy Island at all?
Sandy Island?
Yeah, Sandy Island is the island that was supposedly just to the west of Australia. And many people write Sandy Island off as, they say it's a conspiracy that they made it disappear. This is actually a big one in the Mandela effect, which we've talked about a lot. Mandela effect seems to come up quite a bit in our shows, but a lot of people remember this being there, remember it being on maps, and as it turns out, this 15 mile long, 3 mile wide little island was kind of to the west of Australia. It used to appear on Google Maps. It doesn't anymore. Then there was a time when, although it was taken off of Google Maps, if you searched it, it would still take you to that point. And you could see where it almost appeared to be removed. Now, it will no longer go there through the Google Earth search engine. I was saying Google Map before I meant to say Google Earth. I apologize. It will no longer take you there through Google Earth. But when people have gone back, and I wouldn't know how to do this, I fully admit, but I've watched videos where other people have done this. They go find it, and of course the videos could be fake. I don't know, but they're showing an area that has definitely blacked out. It's not there, but it's unnaturally not there. There is a blacked out area on Google Earth where this island used to exist. Some of the Mandela effect people like to show different things where this used to appear on maps. It used to appear on globes. It used to be visible. One of the kind of strange but kind of cool examples is the movie Dazed and Confused.
One thing, Josh, about Sandy Island is there's actually two. There's the Great Sandy Island, which is off the coast of Western Australia, which is actually, I believe, a place that's actually there. I think the one that you're referring to is Sandy Island or New Caledonia, which they said is off the eastern coast of the northeastern coast of Australia.
Northeastern?
Yes.
I thought it was western, but I could be wrong. Yeah, that's not what I prepped for today necessarily.
It's a big island.
Yeah, 15 by 3.
But when it comes to something like that, I could totally see something like that at once existing, but based off erosion and
supposedly now an expedition from University of Sydney did go and search for it, and they did not find it. They had no luck finding it, no luck finding even something that any signs of it, that perhaps it was covered over. Another one that I'm big into, and I know Adam isn't so much into this one, but one that I believe in far more than Atlantis actually is the things they've talked about with High Brazil. I don't know if you're familiar with High Brazil at all.
No.
And, High Brazil was an island that was off the coast, not directly off the coast, but west of Ireland. Now, in High Brazil, the first time you hear about High Brazil is in 1325, actually. Some people have talked about how it was noted on maps. It was, it's been on quite a few maps from 1325 well into the 1600s. It was usually on maps. 1872 is the last documented sighting of it. Now, even any sighting technically it's really just one person's word. Or actually, in this case, it was a couple dozen people who, was said to have sighted it in 1872. But there's a lot of proof that this place existed, that this small island of High Brazil did at one point exist. Pretty certain it's not there now.
Mhm.
But when they have done satellite searches, there does seem to be a underwater rising or land mass in that area.
I mean, if it's not too steep, I mean, it could just be rising water levels coupled with maybe a small earthquake or something like that, and
Sure.
it could be submerged.
What is strange about High Brazil is you have so many more first-person accounts than you do of anything with Atlantis or anything like that. But some of the stuff is kind of like a mythological, mystical idea. They said there was, it was very advanced, and they were, there was like some magicians there, and they had huge black rabbits. There's this other thing, huge black rabbits, is what was there. They also said that High Brazil was shrouded in fog, so people didn't see it a lot of the times, and that it was visible around every 7 years or so. The fog would kind of dissipate, and then you could see it better, was some of this. What's strange, though, is that both two saints, St. Barrett and St. Brendan, both visited this island. They claim to, anyway. Visited this island when they were on their religious pilgrimages. And they both referred to it as the Promised Land later. So it was this amazing, beautiful place. And the descriptions they gave were near identical to each other. And it was described as a almost perfectly circular. We're not talking circumference and radius here. We're talking viewing it as a picture. Very, very circular island. And that people said that, we walked the coastline forever, and it never seemed to end. We're like, well, it's probably a circle. But, this is happening around 1674. Captain John Nismet is another one that he claimed to have crashed. When his ship was going off course, he thought he was in the middle of the Atlantic basin. He started crashing into some rocks. And some people got off, and the people on the island gave them gifts of gold and silver. And they got back on the boat and came back and brought the gold and silver back with them. Maybe this is crazy. Another really crazy thing when it comes to High Brazil, though, relates to UFOs, actually. You guys ever heard the name Jim Penniston? Jim Penniston was a member of the U.S. Air Force, and he was reported at the time that they had a close encounter in Suffolk, in the United States. He claimed that this part he left out of the initial report because he was getting the idea that they were just calling him crazy, so he didn't have much to say. He said that he touched part of the UFO, and that he was given binary code. He was given an image of a bunch of ones and zeros. He wrote it down in his notebook, kept it there for who knows how long, and that later, when he was doing a UFO special after he was retired from the Air Force, he told this part of it, and they said, well, ones and zeros, it's, sounds like binary, let's see it. Let's see what it is. And he pulled out the old notebook, and he gave it to them. Now, maybe this is fake. If you want to just say it's fake, well, then I don't have an argument for you. But he supposedly had no idea what it was. He couldn't read binary, but he gave it to them. The experts ran it through, and the binary code revealed the coordinates for High Brazil.
I don't necessarily believe that High Brazil doesn't exist. I guess I'm more against the fantasy aspect of it, which seems absurd.
The magician and the black rabbits.
Yeah, that seems absurd.
But
how is that the most implausible part?
But doesn't it seem like that's something that someone from the 1500s would say if they saw an even fairly advanced civilization? I mean, if there was just some strange dudes who could blow a flute and make the rabbits run in a circle, they would call that magic. I don't necessarily think that there was magicians there.
Look at how much technology has changed just in our lifetime. You think that if you were put in suspended animation for 100 years and woke up, I mean, you would probably see stuff that you wouldn't believe is real. That, I mean, people from 100 years ago, they would, you're sitting there talking on a cell phone, they're going to think you're talking to yourself and you're crazy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
I still think that sometimes when I see somebody on a Bluetooth. Like, okay, wait, they're schizophrenic. Oh no, they're just talking on a Bluetooth. That's cool.
No, I'm not denying it. Like I said, I can't get behind the giant rabbit thing.
No, I know.
That's
and hey, they're not saying like Godzilla giant rabbits, just giant by rabbit standards. The pictures they drew were like
it's like
dog size rabbits.
Dog size.
Dog size.
I think those actually still exist.
Well, they do. There's some gross rabbits out there. Rabbits kind of gross me out anyway.
Rabbits do?
Yes, especially the huge ones. I don't know. There's people that have like those pet rabbits that are huge.
They're like the most harmless animal.
Just the big ones.
I mean, they're biters sometimes, but
they just gross me out. No, I like rabbit. Tastes good too. Rabbit's good eating.
To me, like some of the story sounds like some type of Alice in Wonderland type of thing.
Yeah.
With the big rabbits, the magicians, and I don't know. It seems like
how far down the rabbit hole do you want to go?
Yeah.
What?
Is that a rabbit?
Yes.
Yeah. That is a disgusting rabbit.
So, it's quite possible that maybe you got one of those with black fur.
Yeah.
Yeah, but how many of them? Were they talking about many of these black?
No, though some people reported, I think several, but the one guy just reported there was like a magician and a black rabbit. Yeah. But this was kind of viewed as was it like Celtic gods lived here? But then most people didn't think of it as like Celtic gods. They viewed it as like monks on this island, kind of just doing strange things.
Which I think we established that gods are just advanced civilization.
I'm sure. But yeah, what is Bill Murray saying? Groundhog Day? Maybe God doesn't really know everything. Maybe he's just been around so long that it seems like he knows everything.
I'm a god. I'm not the god. I'm just a god.
Yeah, no, you gotta love it. And if it says it in Groundhog Day, it's definitely verifiable.
Yeah.
Well, Gozer says it in Ghostbusters too. I mean, she has, you know.
Someone asks you if you're a god, you say yes. Very true. Is that Gozer or is that Zool?
No, that is Zool. Oh wait, no, that was Zool.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yeah. It was Zool.
It's Zool and.
Oh wait, no,
No, it is Gozer.
Yeah, it's because they asked is Gozer get the
Gozerian? Yeah, Zool is who Sigourney Weaver becomes Zool, right?
Yes,
and
I believe so.
What's his name? Moranis becomes Vince Clortho, and they bring about the coming of Gozer.
Yeah, he's the gatekeeper.
Yeah. The keymaster.
The key, yeah.
Yeah, one of them's the keymaster, the other one's the gatekeeper.
I think he was the keymaster.
I really should know this, having seen this movie 9 million times.
Well, I can't point out either one of the
Ghostbusters was mentioned, or was you played the clip from Ghostbusters in our very first Deep Issues show. Do you recall this? In the Ibaka cast. Which I think of as our very first Deep Issues show. This was before the name Deep Issues was assigned to them. But
was that the one where Winston and Ray are in the...
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very cool stuff. But Atlantis, do we got anything else to kind of get back to with Atlantis? Has anyone changed their mind at all? Has anyone?
I really haven't. I think it's entirely plausible that there was a big ancient civilization that was wiped off the face of the earth due to some type of catastrophic event or a series of catastrophic events that happened, and I don't think that's something out of the realm of possibility here. The world, I think, the world's a big place. The world is, it's old, and I think over the course of time, something like that could have happened.
One thing that I don't think we mentioned was we mentioned the Greek written book, the Truth Behind the Legend, Atlantis, the Truth Behind the Legend, and something that I thought was pretty intriguing that they brought about in that book is that they talk about the symbols that Plato, and I believe
Herodotus, who you mentioned, right, Ed?
the symbolism they used, that was always interpreted as 9,000 years. And Galliphalulus, again, I'm murdering that name, I know I am, but, and Bacon, talk about how they believe that it was misinterpreted, that the symbol was misinterpreted for the very similar symbol for 900 years, the 100 to 1,000, and that they're saying it was not nearly as long before that. So the idea that Plato's allegory was talking about something so far removed from our own civilization perhaps was misinterpreted by a tenth. Basically, instead of 9,000, we're talking 900. So it's a thought, and like I said, this book gives a very realistic interpretation. Maybe they're just, you always can ask yourself, are these guys just kind of goofing off with stuff like this? Are they just trying to sell books? Are they just trying to, write a fiction book and to the tune of a nonfiction book to see what happens? Yeah, perhaps. But, if you're that kind of skeptic, then maybe none of this stuff is for you, really. But, and I think that goes back to kind of what you were hinting at too, Ed, is that, whether it's right or wrong, there's so many people out there who they're taught something in grade school that they can't explain at all, such as the Earth being around for millions of years. That basically they can't explain why that's right if their life depended on it. But they were taught it, and they've heard it enough times, so they, in turn, then cannot be convinced that there's any truth but that. And I find that kind of strange. And I do, and I find modern science kind of strange from time to time, because modern scientists seem very reluctant to give credence to anything that doesn't go within their narrative. And to me, that's not okay. Even if they're right, it's not okay. They're scientists. They should want to...
As much as we might like to believe that every scientist just is some honest soul searching for the truth, and there's probably a lot of people out there like that, but maybe when they go to become a scientist, that's kind of what they're thinking. The reality is there's a lot of politics involved. I mean, if you come out and you have a completely opposite worldview as all of your peers, you're going to be ostracized. You're going to be left out. You're not going to get grants from universities. Mm-hmm. You're going to go broke. There's a lot more to it than simply discovering the truth. And sometimes
people have agendas.
Yeah. And if you want to continue working, you know what? Maybe you discard that little piece of evidence that doesn't fit the mainstream view and continue doing whatever your work you're doing.
No, you're right. I mean, these people that take a stand, very learned people, sometimes very brilliant people, even if they're wrong, very brilliant people, they are certainly ostracized. They are certainly put out into the fringes. Sure, you can see them talking on YouTube. You can see them on Netflix documentaries talking about this, and they're still PhDs and scientists and everything else, but they do not get the backing of the community any stretch.
Look at the whole global warming. I mean, you would think watching the media that if you were to just pick out 97 or 98 out of every 100 scientists, they would say our Earth is warming at an alarming rate, and all these things that we're saying we need to institute in our government, we need to do them. And
Settled science, right?
yeah, when the reality is they don't completely agree on it. Some of them think, yeah, the Earth is warming, but it's not due to man. Or a lot of them, even they think that it is and it's due to man, they don't necessarily agree with all these progressive policies of implementing carbon taxes and whatever else to try and head it off.
No, and this is aside from whether you believe in climate change or believe in man-made climate change or don't believe in climate change at all.
Mhm.
But the idea, the term settled science is it's offensive to me.
It's a contradiction.
It really is. The idea that you would stop studying something, because that's what they're telling you to do when they say that a science is settled. They're telling you, they're telling you we got to stop studying this because it's all figured out. We got all the answers.
Yeah.
120 years ago, there were a few doctors who said, here in the United States, who said that that the reason so many people are dying in surgeries, the reason so many women are dying in childbirth, is because doctors should be washing their hands before they did this stuff.
Yeah.
Those men were ostracized by the smartest people in the medical and scientific communities.
Yep.
Said that's ludicrous. It's ridiculous. You're an idiot for saying it. Now, we of course know that that's true. Yeah, wash your hands before you perform surgery. I mean, I'm not one of those guys that feels like they got to wash their hands every 5 seconds. I don't use hand sanitizer all the time, but yeah,
if you're
I mean,
a doctor
come
who just wiped his ass and you got a bunch of germs on it and
Right.
you're sticking it into somebody's body, it's
Yeah.
probably not good for them.
Exactly, or you just perform surgery on somebody else, and now you're
Yeah.
So no, these. There's always been times in history where people were so certain they were right about things,
Mhm.
and the truth is, the only constant in history and in science is that we're constantly finding out that those people were wrong.
Yep.
I mean, as brilliant as Albert Einstein was, in a lot of the things Einstein said are still studied to this day, and they should be, because he's arguably the most brilliant person to ever live. Some of Einstein's stuff has been pretty debunked, actually. It wasn't all perfect. He couldn't test it the way we can now. A lot of it they test and they say, wow, how in the hell did he figure that out?
Or presidents left office or they got assassinated.
Yeah. 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 But, I don't know. There's a lot to this. Atlantis. I will say this. I know that, I was I was the big time skeptic going into this. I'm not saying I've come completely to the other side, but the two of you they've definitely said some things that I couldn't find in my internet research, or through skimming a few books, watching some documentaries. You guys have definitely said some things that have opened my eyes that I couldn't get from any of those other sources. So I'm a little more on board. My tune has changed a little bit just from doing this show. So, final thoughts. Are we ready for final thoughts?
I gave my final thoughts.
You gave your final thoughts?
I gave my final thoughts.
Ed, final thoughts on Atlantis?
I really don't have much to add. I guess that it's obviously I think it's most likely real. I mean, all the mythology surrounding it, there's probably a lot of it that's complete BS. A lot of it that's probably true, but not due to any sort of evidence, but just because of the actual likely state of the Earth at that time, I think.
Mm-hmm. And a big part of it for you too, Ed, is the young Earth
Yes.
thing, right? Yeah, and that is something that I'm not saying I'm on board with it. I'm not saying I'm not on board with it, but it's very intriguing to me. I certainly don't write it off, especially coming from me. I'm not a scientist. So, and I wish Kyle could have been on this episode. I think we did a great job of covering some of this stuff, but I wish Kyle could have been on this episode because, and he'll be back on the next Deep Issues, I think. But Kyle is a scientist. He would have, he would have been able to lend some insight into some of this stuff that maybe we couldn't quite say ourselves, even though you two are pretty bright when it comes to science. But Ed is. But I'm not a scientist, so I'm not going to discount, like I was trying to say before, I'm not going to discount a young Earth theory or some of these other, Great Flood theories, some of these other theories, when I couldn't begin to explain to you the quote-unquote accepted theory. It's not like I can sit down and break down this accepted theory for you. So if I hear one brilliant person explaining to me why the accepted theory works, and another brilliant person explaining to me why it doesn't, I'm going to listen to both of them. And I think other people should too. It only makes sense to me. Especially since we all can't be scientists. I really can't. You can only dedicate your life to learning so many things. Yep. And if you haven't dedicated to science, you're probably not going to be a scientist at this point.
Yep.
But we should go to Pumpkin.
Are we going to Pumpkin?
I think we should go to Pumpkin. Pumpkin, the all-knowing, all-telling Pumpkin, who chooses for us our next topic for Deep Issues. Our next Deep Issues show will be when? Today is June 13th. Our next Deep Issues show will be July 11th.
July 11th.
Oh, July 11th will be the next Deep Issues show. Ed has just selected the next topic from within the gullet of Pumpkin.
Are we ready?
And Adam will now read it. Our next Deep Issues show will be...
All right, the next Deep Issues show will be... It's actually one of mine.
Oh, what do we got?
Project Bluebeam.
Ah, very cool. Very cool. Looking forward to that one. Project Bluebeam. That is cool. Can we fill a full Deep Issues program with Project Bluebeam? Of course we can. Of course we can, ladies and gentlemen. We absolutely can fulfill an entire episode with Project Bluebeam, and we will on July 11th. I am very much looking forward to that. But unless somebody else has something to add or throw in, I think that may be it for webisode number 47I. I think X-Cast.
Well, I think we did. I think we did a good job tonight with this one. I do. The additions and everything like that. I think it went well.
I think so as well. I think we went into some other stuff, which I hope people enjoyed. I hope people, if you were looking for intense hour and a half on straight Atlantis, then we may have let you down. I hope we didn't, but I think it was better to go into some of the stuff we went into because, I don't know, I feel like it really kind of lends some insight and gets you closer to the answer that really only you can find out for yourself because we're really not going to probably know if Atlantis existed in our lifetime. I mean, it's really probably not going to happen. But thanks for tuning in, everybody. Tune in next week when we have a special show, and not a Deep Issues. We have a special show next week devoted completely to Star Wars theories, where we will have special guest Brad Davis, up-and-coming podcaster and big-time Star Wars nerd. We will discuss these then, and there are some fascinating Star Wars theories. There really are some very cool ones. So please tune in for that. See you next week, everybody. Thanks.